Fathers Philip Connolly and John Joseph Therry were appointed the first Catholic chaplains to the colony. They'd barely arrived when they started building the first chapel to Mary Help of Christians on this site and the first Catholic school in Parramatta. The school was already operational by January of 1821 with 31 pupils and Mr George Morley, their teacher. That school was open to all, not just Catholics, as has been the policy of Catholic education in Australia ever since. As the settlers spread through the continent, they brought with them their religious and educational aspirations. And by 1839, there were already 19 Catholic schools in New South Wales alone. Until large numbers of religious arrived, lay people staffed these parish schools, often in a single room with boys and girls or different levels separated by a curtain. Eventually, certified teachers in registered Catholic schools were paid modest salaries by the government. And Crown land provided for some church schools. But with enduring sectarianism and rising secularism, the mood turned against church schools. Funding for Catholic teachers ceased for nearly 100 years. And by 1880, the imposition of free, compulsory and secular state schools put Catholic education in real jeopardy. Today's feast speaks very directly to that absolutist secularism. The forces of the French Revolution and Napoleon sought to stamp out Catholicism in Europe by closing churches, convents and schools, replacing the Christian God with that of the Enlightenment. Napoleon jailed both Pope Pius VI, who died in prison, and then Pope Pius VII. When Europe looked like falling to the secularists, the Holy Father called upon the faithful to pray the Rosary, just as his namesake, Pius V, had done 2 centuries before when Europe was on the verge of falling to the Muslim Empire. Pius VII vowed that if Mary's intercession saved them, he would dedicate a new feast to her under the title Help of Christians, just as his predecessor had instituted a feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. In answer to those prayers, the Pope was liberated on this day in 1814, which he then decreed to be the day of the feast. Catholicism would survive the assaults of secularism in Europe. And when Father Therry was looking for a patron for the local church and country, Our Lady Help of Christians seemed ideal. Like Pius VII and their heavenly patroness, the Catholic community in Australia resisted secularisation. Archbishop Roger Bede Vaughan was outspoken in defence of Catholic education against the godlessness and sectarianism which he saw happening in the schools and society around him. The bishops, clergy, religious and lay faithful were equally resolute, as they committed to giving families the choice of a Catholic school in every town and suburb. With the arrival of nuns, brothers and clerical religious from overseas and the advent of some homegrown orders, religious built, led and staffed most Catholic schools with the help of lay staff and benefactors. By the 1960s, however, these schools were struggling to keep up the facilities and teacher-student ratios now expected for Australian schools. Only by securing state aid was this possible. And today, Catholic education is very much a partnership between church, families, and the community. Father Therry, Bishop Polding, and St Mary MacKillop could never have imagined that after 2 centuries, Catholic education in Australia would have grown to the point that it now educates thousands of preschoolers in church-sponsored early childhood centres, around 770,000 primary and secondary school students in some 1,750 schools with nearly 100,000 staff, 200,000 Catholic children in government schools through special religious education provided by catechists, around 50,000 post-schoolers on the several campuses of our Catholic universities or the other tertiary institutions, and thousands more provided for in Catholic chaplaincies and residential colleges in state universities. Thus, the Church in Australia today engages in education from womb to tomb, or at least from P to T, preschool to tertiary, assisting over 1 million students at a time. It is an extraordinary achievement. It's often been said that Catholic schools are the jewel in the crown of the Church of Australia, with few parallels overseas. Alongside families and parishes, your schools are the Church's principal place for meeting with young people. There, many of you, my young friends, encounter Christ. Intensify your knowledge and love of God, and are formed as future leaders and contributors to Australian society and to the building of God's kingdom. Your Catholic schools are also a major part of Australia's educational ecosystem and social capital. They are mostly the equal of other schools regarding programs, outcomes, professionalism, facilities and innovation today. Steadfast in their commitment to excellence and equity, they've given millions of young Australians of diverse backgrounds a high-quality education and raised many from the bottom of the social pile. In the process, they've helped nurture a more just, prosperous and cohesive Australia. On the face of it, our first reading today presents a rather old-fashioned picture of the perfect wife and mother. Not one we dare propose in a modern Catholic girls' classroom. Yet if we delve more closely into the text, we may find it speaks to something of what we've been all about and still are trying to offer our young women in Catholic education. The woman in Proverbs, whom our feast identifies with Mary herself, is praised not for her charm or beauty, For these, the text warns, are conceits. But for her strength and character, her wisdom and reputation, and her sheer drivenness. No kept woman this. She oversees the household, is a linchpin of the domestic economy, is a businesswoman in her own right, dealing in real estate, agriculture, and the rag trade. She feeds her family and the poor. As a leader, we're told she looks confidently to the future, and as a teacher, she schools others in love and kindness. If our first reading offers an inspiring vision for education, work and family by women and for young women, our second reading was addressed to wise and learned men, and presumably men-to-be. It too lauds good lives over earthly, animalistic, or devilish ones. Humble service more than self-seeking ambition, wisdom over cunning, compassion and truth instead of hypocrisy and bias, peacemaking over grudge-bearing. Mary's Magnificat in our Gospel presents a similar pattern of life to those first two readings. Life in God's kingdom for students and teachers. Exalting in God, standing with the lowly, nourishing the disadvantaged, trusting in the promises that truth, goodness, and beauty will ultimately triumph, and cooperating in bringing that about. Because Catholic schools aim to cultivate these very qualities in you, our young people, it's unsurprising that so many of our graduates go on to put their character, skills, and knowledge at the service of others in politics or law, as leaders of industry, professions, or trades, as spouses or parents, volunteers and parishioners, as teachers or nurses, priests, nuns, or brothers. So today, my young friends, and you, their teachers, and leaders also, we celebrate a very rich legacy, the legacy to which we are heirs, born of inspiring vision, unwavering resolve, and sheer hard work. The Bicentenary of Catholic education in Australia invites us to remember the past with gratitude, be inspired by that story in the present, and look forward with faith in the future. But there must be no complacency. We must focus more than ever on the Catholic difference, including transmission of faith, on access and enrolments, and on educational opportunity and excellence. After 2 centuries of service, we in Catholic education are determined to make an even greater contribution to the lives of our young people, families, church, and society. Happy 200th birthday, Catholic education. Our Lady, Help of Christians, pray for us.